So, let's talk about a year in history when something went terribly wrong. I mean, a year when the planet's thermostat just completely broke, the seasons basically collapsed, and the whole world was plunged into this strange, gloomy twilight.
I mean, really think about it. Imagine you're waiting for spring to finally turn into summer. You're waiting for that warmth, for the sun, for things to grow, but it just doesn't happen. Instead, the cold and the dark just stick around. It sounds like something out of a movie, right? But for millions of people, this was their terrifying reality. We're talking about the year 1816. And right in the middle of what should have been peak summer, people were waking up to find frost on the ground. They were seeing snow fall from a sky that was always gray. It was obvious something was seriously wrong with the world.
Yeah, this was the year that would go down in history books and in folklore as the year without a summer. So let's dive into exactly what happened, these bizarre and honestly frightening events that earned it that name. And this wasn't just some local cold snap. No, this was chaos on a global scale. All across New England, people were seeing heavy snow in June. There were killing frosts in July and August that just wiped out any hope for a harvest. And over in Europe, it was a totally different kind of misery. Just weeks and weeks of this endless, bone-chilling rain, under a sky so dark it felt like the sun had just given up. You know, for the people living through this, it must have felt like the end of the world was actually happening. They had no earthly idea what was causing it. To find the real source, we actually have to jump back in time 1 year, to 1815, and go all the way to the other side of the planet.
It turns out, the cause of all this suffering was the absolutely cataclysmic eruption of Mount Tambora, a huge volcano in what we now call Indonesia. And this wasn't just any eruption. It was one of the most powerful volcanic events in all of recorded human history.
Just to give you an idea of the scale we're talking about, the explosion, the sheer sound of the blast was so loud it was heard over 2,000 kilometers away. It didn't just obliterate the island it was on. It was about to send a deadly ripple across the entire globe.
So you have to be wondering, how does a volcano in Indonesia make it snow in America? Well, the answer is this incredible phenomenon, a stratospheric veil. See, Tambora didn't just spew lava and ash nearby. It blasted millions of tons of superfine ash and sulfur dioxide gas so high they went into the stratosphere. And up there, that cloud of particles didn't just fall back down. Oh no. It spread out, wrapping around the planet like a thin, invisible blanket, and started blocking the sun's rays from reaching the Earth. And with so much of the sun's energy being reflected back into space, the Earth started to cool down fast. This single event set off an absolutely devastating chain reaction, a cascade of effects that would be felt by pretty much every person and every part of society all over the world. It was a terrifyingly simple domino effect when you look at it. The eruption creates the veil. The veil blocks the sun. The lack of sun makes temperatures plummet, throwing weather patterns into total chaos. And, this is the crucial part, when the weather goes that haywire, agriculture just collapses. And when the food runs out, society itself starts to crack. For an average person, this collapse hit them in the most basic way possible, the cost of food. With all the grain crops failing across the entire northern hemisphere, the price of a loaf of bread just skyrocketed. It went from being the food everyone could afford to a luxury that most families simply couldn't get their hands on. And the hunger was just everywhere. It wasn't only bread. Farm animals were starving to death because the grass and hay they ate wouldn't grow. That completely crippled meat and milk supplies. People got so desperate they were eating anything they could find. Tree bark, roots, weeds. All this malnutrition just shattered people's immune systems, which let diseases like typhus just tear through the population. And in the cities, all that desperation boiled over into anger, leading to massive food riots and a total breakdown of social order.
But beyond all that physical suffering, just try to imagine the psychological toll. Waking up every day to a cold, gray sky. No sun. Just endless rain or gloom. It must have felt so deeply unnatural. So apocalyptic. It's no wonder so many people became absolutely convinced that this was some kind of divine punishment, that they were literally witnessing the end of days. Hope was a resource that was just as scarce as food.
But here's where the story takes a fascinating turn. Because even in the middle of all this darkness and despair, something pretty remarkable happened. The crisis, the gloom, and the sheer desperation accidentally planted the seeds for a few creations that would, believe it or not, change the world forever.
It's almost hard to believe, right? You've got these two massive problems caused by the eruption, this relentless, miserable weather, and a total agricultural collapse. But out of that suffering, two world-changing innovations were somehow born.
So that summer, a group of famous English writers, including a very young Mary Shelley, were on vacation at Lake Geneva. But they ended up trapped indoors for days on end by that non-stop cold rain. To pass the time, they decided to hold a little contest to see who could write the best ghost story. Well, Mary Shelley's entry, an idea born directly from the gloom and doom of 1816, became the novel Frankenstein.
At the very same time, the famine was creating another huge problem. Horses were starving. And back then, no horses meant no transportation. So in response, a German inventor named Karl Dreis started working on a solution, a way for a person to get around that didn't need an animal to pull it. He came up with something he called a running machine. It was this two-wheeled contraption you pushed along with your feet. And yep, it was the direct ancestor of the bicycle you and I know today.
So, The Year Without a Summer gave us one of literature's greatest monsters and a machine that changed how we move. But maybe its most important lasting legacy is actually what it taught us about our own planet.
See, before Tambora, the idea that one single event on one side of the world could dramatically change the climate for everybody, well, it was mostly just a theory. This was the first undeniable proof. It became this foundational case study for scientists, showing them for the first time just how fragile and interconnected everything is: our atmosphere, our food supply, and our societies. Even today, when scientists model the effects of major climate events, from other volcanoes to scary scenarios like nuclear winter, the data from 1816 is still an absolutely crucial reference point.
And really, that all leaves us with a pretty important question. The Year Without a Summer was this stark, terrifying lesson in just how quickly our world can be thrown into chaos by a change in the atmosphere. It showed us that all the systems we rely on are maybe a lot more fragile than we like to think. So the real question for us today is, are we paying attention to the lessons that history and nature have already tried so hard to teach us?